Everyone, welcome to week 2 Senate. I'm just going to get things started as soon as possible. We can start with roll call. Ariel, if you can do your thing.
Perfect for roll call today if everyone wants to message in the main chat what they've been working on for ASG.
Perfect. So just message in the chat what you've been working on for ASG, and that will be your roll call for the day. And let's move on to the invocation. If I could get a volunteer to read out the invocation for us.
May we, the Student Senate, have the wisdom, patience, and guidance to be responsible representatives. May we be fair in judgments, enlightened in our decisions, and ethical in our actions. Go Broncos.
Go Broncos. Thank you, Cassidy. Sniped it away from Theo. Can we move on to the line acknowledgement statement now? Get them on. Perfect.
I can do
Theo?
it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We pause to acknowledge that Santa Clara University sits on the land of the Ohlone and Moquayuma Ohlone people who trace their ancestry through the Mission Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. Remember their connection to this region and give thanks for their opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people of the past and present.
Thank you, Theo. Let's move on to the approval of previous minutes. This is last week's minutes.
I move to approve the previous minutes.
Second.
Motion from Monica, second from Abby. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Last week's minutes have been approved. Let's move on to the approval of the agenda. The agenda this week is pretty straightforward. We're going to start off with a quick bylaw amendment, and it's just the RSO dissolution. I'm pretty sure this is one of the ones that will have to be voted on this week, which will involve suspension of standing rules. After that's done, we're going to move on to the campus safety audit summation. Angel Lynn will be presenting that along with maybe some help from Hawad. And then once she's done with that, we'll invite everyone for public comment. If there's any spectators or anyone from the general student body that wants to bring forth any questions, that is the time for them to do so. If not, I know for a fact that a lot of us have questions of our own, and it'll just be a time for us to kind of put forth all the questions that we have. I know that CSC or Abby, your committee was kind of going off with different questions, and I think that would be a very good starting point. And then we can kind of go from there. And in the meantime, CRO will be compiling these lists of questions and kind of triaging it. So when Father O'Brien comes at 8, he'll have a couple of minutes to just give some introductory remarks. I don't really know what he's going to talk about, but I would assume is kind of the timeline going forward and what we should expect from him and the administration regarding their response to the safety audit and what promises they can make. And then after that is done, we'll have roundtable remarks around 8:30. So Father O'Brien is scheduled to speak from 8 to 8:20, but I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed a little bit later. So I just wanted everyone to keep that in mind. And for roundtable remarks, the biggest thing is really talking about, like, we're gonna have an event next week. What do we want that event to look like, and kind of just talking about what we learned today. And then after that's done, we shall adjourn. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Motion
Second.
from Carmen, second from Theo. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda has been approved. Let's move on to new business with the RSO dissolution bylaw amendment. This is the amendment. Carmen, take it away.
Yes. Hey, everyone. So as most of you know, in response to the tweet that went out by the SU College Republicans, they have decided to dissolve. So actually the president of the College Republicans decided to dissolve, In order for an RSO to dissolve, they must meet in person. So highlighted in bright yellow are the changes that we have been working on for the past couple of days. So for an RSO to dissolve, they must meet in person. So we're adding the change that they can also meet over a virtual setting. In addition to that, the evidence that they have to provide has to be their signatures and pen. However, we can't do this right now given the current circumstances. And so we're resorting to having online signatures accompanied by their full name and the SCU student ID numbers. And then the last part highlighted in yellow is that once an RSO decides to dissolve, they must wait between 1 to 4 years for them to recharter if they would so like to do that. So yeah, that is basically it. And so if this is approved, then the College Republicans Club could start dissolving this week. Do we have any questions? No?
What
Yeah,
is what is rechartering, and like what does that process look like?
So rechartering, I'm actually not sure if that is the correct term, but that would mean that a club would have to apply. So in section D, it says that if a club remains inactive, they can dissolve, but then they can just apply again, whereas they would have to wait between 1 to 4 years, depending on the reason for going through this process, and then they could be able to apply again to become an RSO.
Would they be able, like, would the same group of people be able to apply as like a new RSO, but doing the same thing? Or is that like,
So
what-
most likely, depending on the time frame, the people that were probably there would have graduated. But since it is between 1 to 4 years, it's likely that some people who were probably freshmen, first years can probably reapply. So that is what it's looking so right now, because at first I thought 4 years, but then that might be a little extensive depending on whatever the reason was for the RSO to dissolve. So we want to do this on a more of case by case basis. Does that answer your question, Cassidy?
yeah, and then it would be your committee that decides the like 1 to 2 the 1 to 4 year distinction, or who is deciding that?
So I put here Senate, just for more just to get more representation. It could also be SAC, but I just thought it would be better to get the input of the whole student senate before we make a decision. Yes.
So just to kind of like take a step back, this RSO dissolvement process, this affects all 180 RSOs. Like this is something that's going to be blanket for every single RSO.
Yeah.
And then because of that, like the language we're using is intentionally vague. And at the discretion of Senate, currently, like we've kind of like approving RSOs is kind of power that's been vested in us, like of all of Senate, all 28 members, but currently that has been subdivided to just SAC, and whatever process that SAC currently goes through, and the process that SAC currently goes through is it used to be a vote for all 28 members of Senate, but ever since last year it's a vote within SAC, I think. I don't know if that's right, Carmen.
No, Justin, thanks for bringing that up. I'm not entirely sure. Ted, are you here? And if so, do you know the answer to this?
Or actually, it might be a vote at the come spring quarter, but it'll be like a lot of RSOs being approved at the same time. But yeah, Ted.
Lori is here as well.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for the new RSOs, they're voted on just in the spring. So I would say instead of recharter, say that to apply to be a new RSO, because then they would go through the provisional student organization process, which I think would be a good process for an RSO who was dissolved, instead of getting to skip all of that and basically like renew in a sense, since we don't really recharter. So I would say the dissolvement to apply to be a new RSO or something like that.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Lori. I'll change that. And
then with members, looking at their constitution, all of that for basically the academic year until they're voted on in the spring.
Okay.
And I think when it says at the discretion of Senate, every single, like whenever an RSO wants to charter, like I don't know if I don't know if we treat RSOs who have dissolved and are trying to recharter differently than RSOs who are just trying to charter from for the very first time. I would assume that it's still going to be the same process, and regardless of what that process is, it's always at the discretion of Senate regardless. So really, at the discretion of Senate just kind of enumerates like what the normal process is for any RSO like chartering. Like it's not specifically for and only for those who are trying to recharter a dissolved RSO.
Okay. Got it. Then
Okay,
only-
that clears up my questions. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was just my main question is like, would the rechartering process be the same as like a new RSO going in? I feel like that has answered my question. So thank you. Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then Ciara, I saw your question. So from my understanding, it is the president of the College Republicans Club, but also a few members, and the club hasn't been really that active at all. So they don't have a lot of like members, but yeah, so that's what we know so far about that.
Okay, yeah, to clarify, we're referring to, for everyone else, that just because the president wants to dissolve, that doesn't mean that they're going to dissolve. But if there's not many members, then we can assume that they will dissolve. But I just want to make sure that people know that just because the president wants to dissolve doesn't mean that that's going to happen for sure.
Got it.
Zakia, you have a question?
Can you hear me? Okay, so
Yes.
I'm still a little bit unclear as to, okay, so what is the 4 years for?
So the 1 to 4 years would be the amount of time that the RSO would have to wait to reapply to become an RSO again, which is
okay, so when they are dissolved, would it be up to Senate to say how long they have to wait to reapply?
Yeah, between the 1 and 4 years. So let's say it is dissolved today. So they have to wait a year from today, they can then reapply, or 4 years from today, they could then reapply.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Of course.
I think the question is like, is that like 1 to 4 year period like determined after it's dissolved? So like it's like, okay, now that you're dissolved, Senate will determine, okay, you have 1 year until you can recharter, or 4 years till you can recharter, or is it kind of something we leave like ambiguously, and then it's only when they come back in 1 to 4 years that we can choose whether or not they can recharter? Does that make sense? Like there's a little bit of ambiguity there, and I think it could be cleared up.
So would you like me instead to add something that says, like we'd have to tell them like immediately, like because they're the ones who decide to dissolve, they come to us, and then we tell them 1 to 4 years, like have like a written notice or something? Is that what you're referring to, Justin?
Yeah, like, and honestly, like it can be up to an RSO that dissolves, like however long they want that period to last, in consultation with CSI, obviously. But Lori, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the way we wrote it was written was at least 1 year. So technically the way the bylaws are written now, they could any RSO can dissolve right now in the winter, and then they could reapply to be a new RSO in the spring. So that's why it's adding this. So it's saying like at least 1 year. So they can't just immediately the next time renewals are around or a new RSOs apply, they have to wait the 1 year. And then we're saying no longer than 4 years. So after that 4 year process, they would have to probably go through like the brand new RSO process and everything. So I think it would be good to keep that at least 1 year so they know that like they can't immediately become an RSO right away. And then the 4 years, I don't know.
Just to clarify, so the timeline kind of is, the 1 year is for, okay, if you dissolve, you won't be able to recharter that same year. But say another group of students wanted to recharter this organization or any organization, because this RSO existed in the past, they would go through a less rigorous process. So the rechartering or the rechartering of this organization would be, or of any organization would be like easier than saying chartering like in the first place. But after 4 years, if no one has wanted to recharter this any organization in 4 years, then it's strict to, okay, there's no rechartering, it's just chartering from brand new.
I think more how it was written here was saying like between the 1 and 4 years, because I had suggested like 4 years, which if you look at some of the bylaws, or some of kind of like the guidelines, it's 4 years. So that, like, let's say for instance, now there's a first year student that could be involved in an RSO that is trying to be dissolved. We have that 4-year time frame so that hopefully anyone who was involved or was an e-board member has graduated. And so that's where the 4-year timeline came from. So it might need to clarify at least 1 year and then figure out what that 4-year language was, but that's where the 4 years came from. And then it was decreased to 1 year. So it might just need to clarify, because after the 4 years, they would apply to be a new RSO again, but they would go through the same process if they were dissolved, and 2 years from now they wanted to become an RSO, they would go through the new RSO process again. Especially because they were dissolved, I wouldn't want it to be an easier process for them. I would want them to go through the exact same new RSO process, because we walk through their constitution, their members, their recruitment, like all of those things. I wouldn't want them to skip any steps because they were dissolved.
So if it's the same exact process, could we just delete the line, but no longer than 4 years at the discretion of Senate? Just make it so that they would have to wait 1 year, and it's automatically assumed that after this 1 year, they would have to go through the same exact rigorous process as the same as if it was like a brand new RSO.
I think you're confusing. I don't know. Just what I'm understanding is, let's separate it into two separate items. There's the process, like whether it's 1 to 4 years or 2 years, whatever the timeline is, there's a process of, okay, this RSO wants to come back. Well, let's just say it's a photography club. The photography club wants to come back after being dissolved. They would just go through the same process that any new RSO would go through. It's not stricter, it's not less strict. It's just the same process that any new RSO would go through. The 1 to 4 years is a standard that Lori and I are familiar with, particularly with Greek life. Whenever it's usually whenever they suspend the fraternity or sorority, it usually is between 4 and 5 years. But in earlier conversations with Carmen and Robbie and a few other students, we didn't want it to be punitive, especially like, for example, the last time we dissolved a group was the ski club, and it was just because they just wanted to be independent. So why make them wait 4 years if it was really kind of a benign reason that they dissolved? So I hope that helps add a little bit more clarity or things for you to consider.
Cassidy, and I think I want to cap it at Cassidy. So last question.
Okay, I was just wondering whether or not the RSO would know about the 1 to 4 years before they vote to dissolve, or whether that decision would be made after they vote to dissolve. Like, are they making that dissolve vote as an informed decision, or not, as knowing whether or not the Senate would be imposing 1 to 4 years?
I would recommend it has to be made at the same time. It's an informed decision. Just because you as the current Senate, or whoever the current Senate is, needs all the facts and information at that time. And you don't want to make it a deferred decision where, let's say it's a group of senators 2 years from now, they may not know everything or have all the facts besides maybe whatever is documented. But it's also just tradition. It's just how things are done with when you're suspending a Greek letter organization. Usually the term of how long they're suspended is done at the same time of when the decision is rendered.
Okay.
So I think in terms of recommendations for changes for here, I think the only change is maybe adding some language clarifying that however long, whether it's 1 to 4 years, this has to be like set in stone. like once an RSO chooses to dissolve, the question is, does that need to be done in the bylaw here, or is that already assumed in like a separate clause?
I think the best thing would be to add it right there on E as like a little section, like it must be decided whatever like the time frame is, so that the RSO can know ahead of time. I think what would be most likely to happen is that I don't think an RSO would want to recharter like a year or two after, but if that does happen, like we can tell them like, oh, you have to wait 2 or 3 years to reapply to be an RSO.
I think that would be a good addition. So yeah.
Does determined at the time of dissolvement, does that seem clear enough?
I'm sorry, Justin. I know that you said you wanted that to be the last question, but I really do have a question.
Go for it.
Okay, so what if a club does something bad, right? And then they say, okay, we're gonna dissolve, and then we say, okay, you're gonna have to wait 3 years, and then they say, well, we're not dissolving anymore. Then what? Can we make them dissolve? Dissolution. I don't know.
Ted, do you happen to know the answer to that? Or
Can you repeat the question, please?
So I was saying, in the case that the club wants to dissolve, and then they tell them how long they would have to wait to dissolve or to recharter, to reapply, whatever, to become a club again, to apply to become a club
Sure.
again. And then the club chooses not to do that anymore because they don't want to wait that long. Is there a way, if the club has done something bad, for us to make them dissolve anyways?
It's something I need to explore a little bit more, to be honest, just because it's a question that a lot of other students have asked me, and I don't have to be honest, it's something that's a little bit beyond my scope to answer that thoroughly. I get my gut reaction is that you want to have as much evidence as possible, and if they are dissolved, or if they're going through the process and they don't garner enough votes by their own membership to dissolve, then that's the decision, because their members decided, hey, we don't want to dissolve. But if the reason is egregious, there could be something where the university, I have to look, I don't have the student handbook in front of me, but I know there's a clause where if they violate if they basically violate any policy in the student handbook, or even any university policies in the university policy, university does have the discretion to revoke them, but it has to be pretty egregious. So it's very nuanced language that would have to be in there. So I don't have a perfectly wordsmith answer for you right now, but I'd have to consult with others to make sure that it is perfect in terms of the wording, and make sure it is legally feasible.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a very convoluted answer.
I guess I'll table discussion for now. I think we have enough information to vote on this resolution now. I would entertain a motion to suspend the standing rules so we can vote on this tonight.
Motion to suspend the standing rules.
Motion from Christina, I think.
Second.
Second from Marielle. All in favor, say aye, or all in favor, please raise your hand.
Justin, I have a message in the chat, but is there a reason we have to vote it tonight?
So the reason it needs to be done sooner rather than later is because there is a specific RSO that wants to dissolve, College Republicans, and the process cannot start, and it's not allowed to start until we change the bylaws. So right now they're kind of in a weird, like, what's the word? I think you know what the word I'm thinking of. Limbo, yes. So the earlier we can change the bylaws, the quicker the process will start.
Okay, got it. But
And yeah,
it looks like the document's almost finished. Like there's highlights and comments and things. So are we voting on the comments or are we voting on the text as?
so we would be voting on everything. So basically everything that's yellow. And I guess I'll define that now. The standing rules have been suspended for the day. For the vote, I would entertain a motion to vote, and specifically we're voting on implementing all of these changes, including the yellow highlights, and the yellow highlights are the changes. I will lower all hands now, but no, yes, I would entertain a motion to vote.
A motion to vote.
Motion from Emma, second from Vanessa. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Perfect. If you would like to approve this bylaw amendment to the RSO dissolvement process, please raise your hand. Perfect. This bylaw has now been amended. Judicial, or Robbie, I assume you would take things from here. Okay, moving on. We will now move on to special orders of business, and we'll start off with a campus safety audit summation led by Angel Lynn.
Okay, hi guys. If you were at the ISAC event yesterday, we were recycling the presentation, but it's okay because I promise I'll try to be super fast and engaging. Let's go. Okay, so yes, we'll just start with this. The audit is broken up in multiple parts. So first, we're going to start out with the history and structure of campus safety. In 1979, public safety services is established because the contract that Santa Clara had with Wells Fargo Security Company expired. So we created our own unit. And then in 1986, the officers petitioned to carry batons and mace, which they did not carry before and they do not carry now. If you read into the details, there's a fun little story about one of the officers faking an attack so that like it would help their argument, but you know, all's well that ends well. And then in 1986, former police chief Richard Damon restructures and reorganizes the chain of command to the command that we have today with the 4 watch commanders. And then in 2000, public safety services is renamed to campus safety services that we know and love today. And then just breaking down the campus safety structure, we have patrol, emergency planning, and parking and transportation. Patrol is the one that we know of most familiarly with John Loretto being the leader, and with 4 watch commanders, all of which, by the way, are men, 2 of which are people of color, but and 5 assistant watch commanders and 13 CS officers. And then this is just an overview of the budget. As you can see, it's $2,600,000. And then we're going over the arrests and activities real quick. With 45 arrests on average per year made by the campus safety officers, and then but these are actually citizens arrests, and the actual arrests are made by Santa Clara police officers. In addition, these are just like a general summary of the arrests that were made. Obviously, alcohol violations are going to be the most prominent, but there's also a lot of notable arrests made for for trespassing and suspicious persons, with only 11 being for theft. We also went into some feedback that Judge Cordell looked into in regards to campus safety, with 64% of undergrads, 61% of alumni having a negative view, with staff and faculty actually having a positive view, but undergrads and alumni are the ones who have the most exposure to campus safety. This was actually a notable story that I know a lot of people have been discussing. It goes, one day in the summer, I was playing a game with some friends at their house off campus across from SWIG, where most girls are staying as part of the girls' soccer camp. Most of us were Black, and after a camp counselor came over to question us if we had a gun or not, we didn't and told her no. A few minutes later, a campus safety officer starts patrolling in front of SWIG, staring us down. Instead of talking to us and clearing things up, the police were called. Here's another story about a student ambassador coming from an alumni who says that they were told explicitly from campus safety that it was okay to racially profile young Black men and women who clearly didn't belong on campus. And then here are some conversations that Campus Safety had with Judge Cordell directly before the incident of August 2020, and also the diversity forum incident during the fall quarter diversity forum. It was like super chillin', everything was great. Like Campus Safety was like, this is the greatest place to work, we're a big family. But now, as you can see, there's a lot more tension between Campus Safety and the president in particular, saying that the president is one-sided and threw Campus Safety under the bus and was unsupportive of Campus Safety. And so like, we're kind of seeing some issues there. And then there's this one quote that talks about how Campus Safety officers very adamantly held onto their belief that they were not racist and that they performed their work in a colorblind manner. And also that Campus Safety employees were required to attend an implicit bias training shortly after the August 22nd, 2020 interaction. But some of them, while they did find the training was helpful, others felt that it was a form of discipline, and a few felt that it was a waste of time. Also, John Loretto did not want to talk to Judge Cordell. So here are some of the important findings that came from the Campus Safety audit. Judge Cordell found that there was a mixed message disconnect, and while Campus Safety sort of markets itself as the Department of Yes and sort of tries to be a very much customer service based one, it's primarily one that is interpreted as law enforcement focused. A lot of us do see Campus Safety officers as exactly officers and cops, and this mixed message has alienated some students and faculty who view Campus Safety officers solely as enforcers. There's also definitely a racial disconnect. Especially calling attention to the fact that many of these Campus Safety officers say that they operate with a colorblind mindset. And while the colorblind mindset is ideal and it looks or sounds nice, it's actually impossible to achieve. Judge Cordell also found that there was a need for racial and gender diversity positions. Campus Safety Services has never been led by a woman, and all of the directors and assistant directors have been white males, with the exception of the current director, who is biracial, who is Caucasian and Latinx. And of the 9 command watch staff positions, 4 watch, only 1 is female. And then something that Judge Cordell really did emphasize was that there is a stronger need for transparency. Currently, the rules and regulations and the policy manual that Campus Safety uses is not available to the SCU community. Also, the SCU community is basically in the dark about what Campus Safety Services does. And then there's also no real way for Campus Safety to actually or for students to know what the activity of Campus Safety is, except for this exact moment. She also said that there was a need for feedback, including the complaints. They need to adopt a procedure that allows for students to complain immediately after an engagement with Campus Safety. There's also a need for campus surveys and or online feedbacks. There's never been a campus-wide survey about the services initiated by Campus Safety, and so that's just definitely something that she says needs to be done. There's also definitely a need for mental health issues to be trained on. There were no mental health professionals on site for any of the welfare checks that Campus Safety has performed throughout the year, and it doesn't appear that Campus Safety officers undergo any mental health training. And so here are some of the recommendations. The big point that Judge Cordell likes or has made is that she wants to reimagine Campus Safety with a holistic approach, and one that really does focus primarily on away from student or from enforcement to a focus on campus safety and actual student wellness. And whether or not this is done by a shift under the Office of Student Life is something that she suggests, but isn't exactly super clear on. She also has some other significant recommendations. These are just a few of them. The replacement of law enforcement military title positions with non-law enforcement military titles, discontinuing the use of handcuffs and law enforcement type badges, discontinuing the use of room searches, and then determining if campus or surveillance cameras ought to be used 24/7. I actually did not know we were monitored 24/7, but and then to review and reevaluate the campus trespass policy, because that policy in particular has been used a lot to hurt a lot of BIPOC community members, and then include students on this reimagined department staff. In addition, here are a few more. Judge Cordell argues that we ought to ensure that the recruitment, promotion, and retention policies of the Imagined Department promotes diversity with respect to race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, and then require periodic anti-bias and implicit bias training for all personnel, which also I find kind of questionable given that a lot of the personnel currently did see that as like a punishment technique and saw it as a waste of time. So I don't know. And also require a minimum of an associate's degree or equivalent education for all hires. Also that to make sure that the reimagined police department or department's policies and procedures are available for the entire community to access, and also to prepare and submit an annual comprehensive campus safety report to the president and maintaining an official history of campus safety. Oh yeah, and here are a few more recommendations done by Judge Cordell, including providing an intake of complaints and misconducts against campus safety personnel by someone outside of campus safety. That person will also conduct investigations of those complaints and make findings. The current process actually makes it so that anyone who complains about campus safety complains to a member of campus safety to be reviewed by other campus safety members. So that is problematic. And then there's also a need to create an immediate feedback process for individuals who had interactions with the reimagined department, in addition to conducting periodic campus-wide surveys and including mental health professionals in the reimagined department's on-site response team. And then I think Hawad's going to go over a few things that are left out of the budget or the audit.
Yeah, thank you, Angel. So a few key points that are just kind of either touched upon, referred to, or actually entirely left out. I'll try to specify how that applies and where. So recommendations are not made in the audit regarding residence life and CSS. Obviously, this is one of the primary locations you may have interacted with them yourself or other students have on issues like lockouts or issues of policy violations within residence life, which obviously has its own governance structure, its own handbook, and about the way students should behave and how documentation occurs in those buildings. Accountability with regards specifically to the incident last summer with Dr. Morgan, as well as the imagery that appeared at the Fall Quarter Diversity Forum with the Assistant Director of CSS, John Loretto. Again, Angel notes that from the report, the Assistant Director of our university CSS did not actually comply or cooperate with the audit for us to be able to have that perspective. We do have some perspective from Mr. Beltran, who is the director. Note the budget in the CSS audit hovers in the mid $2 million range, $2.4 to $2.6 million. This reimagining with a holistic approach actually does indicate the extent to which the department's endowment in that sense is going to become more or less. Obviously, some changes in recruitment, addition of students makes one wonder whether we're going to have a bigger or smaller staff. And finally, specific personnel changes are not made clear. Again, Judge Cordell wasn't necessarily saying in the audit, this is who we should hire and fire, but something that does stand out. And also, while changes in the recruitment and reimagining of imagery and philosophy are mentioned, we don't get an explicit mention of the future recruitment of ex-law enforcement, which when we're trying to understand this holistic reimagination and move away from policing more towards community care is something I think students should take seriously, given the fact that a lot of our leadership at this time are ex-law enforcement in CSS. So some things to look at. And personally, all of these things stood out in my own experiences as a CF in residence life, as someone who worked in parking and transportation, again, next door to CSS, having a lot of interactions with the rank and file of the department, as well as having a few personal confrontations myself with CSS while actually campaigning and expressing some speech on campus. So students interact with CSS in different ways, and that impacts our understanding of them. As we know, monitoring, like Angel said, happens all the time. So we're always being watched on campus. Not all the other Jesuit schools do this. Something to consider as we talk about advocacy going forward, as well as funding and the budget in the future. So thank you, Angel.
And yeah, we'll open things up for, well, this is kind of the public comment. We have about 20 minutes for this. And Ciara, do you want to take things from here?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks a lot, and Angel, super insightful. Sorry you had to kind of rush through that. Okay, one quick thing I just want to differentiate. There's the investigation and the audit. The investigation is supposedly being wrapped up. And once all of that information, it's supposedly a 100-page document, that'll go to two like kind of panels, almost like juries, and they're going to make like the final decision about where to go from here. And that's not under Father O'Brien's control. So conversations about kind of like why wasn't the Dr. Morgan incident included, that is really solely to the investigation. In terms of John Loretto incident at the ISAC forum last quarter, now that I could understand why that like maybe should have been addressed, but also Loretto declined to speak. So just wanted to clear that up in terms of questions. I am typing everything. If you didn't say if you wanted me to ask on your behalf or not in your question, and I haven't asked you directly, can you please follow up on your question saying I will ask or I won't ask? But yeah, let's open the floor. I know there's some non-ASG folks present as well. So if anyone wants to raise their hand and speak, please do so. But I can go through kind of some of the topics that seem to be coming up, and also senators. I don't know if any senators would like to speak. I just want to give priority to our constituents. But if no one from non-ASG wants to speak, then we can do our constituents. I mean, all of you senators.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you could kind of, or just taking a step back, I think like personally, the biggest, like what I want to get out of this, like first, these next 20 minutes with Father O'Brien is just clarity over what they've been working on and kind of what to expect from them over these next couple of weeks. But Ciara, like, can you kind of go over a summary of the questions that you have, given that there aren't any questions?
Yeah, definitely.
comments?
I'm still jotting some down, but from what I have so far, someone will be asking about the balance between restructuring the whole org while also holding the individuals accountable in the two specific incidents. So I guess in this case, we can just focus on the John Loretto incident because the investigation info has not come out yet. From the audit, it seems that relationship with CSS, Father O'Brien's relationship with CSS is strained and individuals call into question his leadership ability. How will he go about dealing with the relationship with CSS so that change is effective, efficient, will actually get done? How does he envision a holistic approach to redesign CSS without fully removing it? Will the university plan on limiting campus safety's presence on campus by funding resources that are proactive rather than reactive? What is the justification behind not reporting on CSS activities and the budget, as in some sort of annual report? I actually, for that question, I would like some follow-up about, are you referring to kind of, would you want an annual report issued to the university by campus safety, just to clarify? The audit mentioned, has there been any consequences for the people involved in the incidents? That kind of will kind of ignore that for now, given the situation with the investigation. A recommendation is to include students on the REIMAGINED department staff. Would these students be compensated for their work? Are there any students that would automatically have a role, i.e. ASG president? I've also heard a general discomfort, not necessarily related to the report, about working with interacting often with CSS because they don't feel safe. How are they going to ensure that these students will be safe and heard? The recommendation includes periodic mental health, anti-bias, implicit bias trainings, and campus-wide surveys. How would they define periodic? Is that every year, every quarter? And to reiterate, if you would like to say anything off any of these questions or provide anything else, feel free to raise your hand. In the event that any of the recommendations for CSS provided by Judge Cordell are not or cannot be fulfilled, can you commit to providing justification and reasoning behind those decisions? I think I said everything. If I didn't, let me know because you guys asked a lot of questions, which I appreciate. I also Anne and I met with Father O'Brien yesterday briefly about a lot of other things, and he just mentioned how he doesn't really have anything to say in the sense of like he's gonna give like a kind of here's what's going on at the moment, here's how we're gonna approach this audit, but his purpose in coming here is actually really to get questions answered from y'all, which is great, and to ensure that or he's getting feedback as well. So you don't have to limit your commentary to just questions. Any feedback would be provided. I know he invited his chief of staff, Molly McDonald, to come and take notes, which he's been doing at the other meetings as well. And if we don't get to everything tonight, I'm sure I talked to Jeannie today and she said that we can get all these questions down so that they have direct answers to send back to us, and we can post that on the ASG Instagram or whatever. That's it for me, honestly. If anyone has anything else to say, I would love to hear general feelings about the audit from all of you, given the pulse of your constituents over the last week.
I was just gonna say, in terms of feedback, it might be good to share the what Hawad went over about like what we noticed was missing from the audit, and so those are like additional matters that he should probably be thinking of and keeping in mind in terms of feedback to give to Father O'Brien. If we want to share that like slide or in some way get that feedback to him, or if someone wants to share that information.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't, again, if you have a comment or a question or anything you want to say at all, just raise your hand and I can call on you. I'm actually curious, Ted, I know you're on Staff Senate, and I know Staff Senate met with Father O'Brien earlier today. Could you give a brief summary of like kind of what he talked about, or any like new information like you gleaned from that meeting, I guess?
I'm actually not on Staff Senate. Just as an employee at staff, I'm technically a member of Senate, Staff Senate. I'm just not a senator or anything like that. But it was an open session. I don't know if Lori attended. I wasn't able to attend because I was a guest speaker at a class, a religious studies class at the time. So sorry, I can't answer your question.
Okay. No, that's fine. No, I just assumed, but I guess I assumed incorrectly. But yeah, I think, or Sarah?
Would we like to then discuss briefly right now about kind of, regardless of what happens tonight, where do we go from here in terms of next week's event, and kind of using this audit as another launching pad to ensure that we are holding admin accountable in our various committees and branches? By figuring out what's the best way to approach like an event next week, what would we like to see? What do you think our like the student body would like to see?
Yeah, I guess I could kick things off. I think my primary concern is like, since the since like the first since what happened with Dr. Morgan and what happened at the ISAC forum, like there's like every single time we've talked to the administration, they're like, oh, okay, wait for the audit. Oh, okay, wait for the investigation. And I feel like it's kind of been a way for the university to, or for the administration to kind of stall, which is like fine. Like I understand like they need to put together all of this like information, and like now that it's out, like where do we go from here? I'm worried that like there hasn't been a lot of it doesn't seem like there was a lot of student input like in the past quarter in terms of, you know, like students being involved in this reimagination of campus safety. And now that this audit is out, I'm worried that, okay, like we're only going to have these next 2 weeks to remain involved in the process, and then for the next 2 quarters we're not going to be involved at all. And that's kind of a fear that I have. I don't think the administration like wants it to be that way, but because of it, I just don't really know like how involved we are going to be in the process. And I would like to, you know, kind of pose a question like, how involved do we want to be in the process? Would we like weekly updates? Would we want, you know, more of these types of forums? Would we want the university or the administration to tell us kind of what changes they're going to implement before they implement them? Or do we want it to be kind of a reactionary thing, right? Like how involved are we going to be in the process? And really the question I'm posing is, how involved should we be in the process?
I think an important thing is going to be holding whatever the timeline is and holding administration accountable to that timeline, and whatever next steps they have. I think that I mean, I would love to maintain and like stay within the process. I think that that's an important thing for us to do, at least to be knowledgeable about it. I don't know if that means like weekly updates or bi-weekly updates, or making sure that whatever the timeline looks like, we are meeting regularly on those important dates. But I think a lot of our next steps are going to depend on what we learn today and what we learn in the next week. So I don't know if that answers your question a lot, but I think we also are kind of playing the waiting game because we also don't know what the future looks like.
I think that at this point, it would be at least to some effect restorative if SU would consider how students feel in their next steps. So if they were to, try to get student feedback on what they were going to do before they did it, just so we feel like we are being considered. Because up until this point, like it's been said, we've just been kind of waiting. But I also definitely agree with Cassidy in that we kind of, they haven't said what they want to do. They haven't really said anything about it yet. So we don't even know their position on it yet. We don't know if they're taking what Judge Cordell said seriously. And that is frustrating. And so I do think it's really, really important that we are holding them accountable to them just doing anything, honestly, at this point, which I also feel like isn't that cool, because now we just want to see something. But that aside, yeah, I feel like it's really difficult, that this is a really difficult thing for us to have to deal with, because I don't feel like they want to do that much about it at this point.
Juan?
Yeah, I think that one really, I guess, pressure point for me at the moment, I think it was kind of touched on in the presentation, but it's a little hard for me to get my head around why there hasn't been a sort of dramatic change in the operation of CSS in such a way that we've seen across the rest of campus, given like the closure and like kind of just reshuffling of how we operate entirely. I mean, we have a very minimal amount of student workers, very negligible amount of faculty and staff on campus. And yet it does seem like the operations of CSS specifically seem a little bit untouched. And in some ways, this is connected to what the audit is looking to identify and the issues we are trying to ameliorate. But for me, it also just brings up the fact that it seems like they're just rolling with the same punches that they had when things were normal. And that seems like a misuse of university resources and tuition paid to the university. And it's very difficult to reconcile this, because I realize that so much of that budget goes to the compensation of CSS workers, and that the actual operating budget besides that compensation is very small. I mean, we saw that on the slide. It's like majority goes to just paying people. So I don't think this is something we should necessarily use time with Father O'Brien tonight with, but a thought that continues to stick out to me, and something that potentially I will interrogate myself or seek an answer for, is why exactly does it seem like CSS does not have a different plan, in the same way that all of us have different plans and faculty and staff have different plans and situation right now.
Are there any live?
I don't want to interrupt.
Brian is here.
I arrived, so
Hello,
I didn't know
Father
whether
Brian.
hey, I didn't know whether you were waiting for me. So here I am. Whenever you're ready, it's fine.
Cool.
Yeah, we could start things early, but before we go, are there any last questions, comments, concerns that anyone wants to bring up? If not, I would like to invite Father O'Brien onto the floor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justin. And thanks to Sierra and Ann for their leadership and all of our senators and HG. So thank you. So I, as you know from my email from last week, I'm visiting various, so there's in our governance on campus, there's a formal bodies within governance. So I'm visiting the faculty senate, the staff senate, and in this case, our student senate. I've also reached out to other student leaders to talk. So through the MCC and ISAC and IGWE. Also happy to meet with other groups or leaders as helpful. And also we'll meet with campus safety. So the whole point of this is actually just to listen. I'm happy to answer any questions if you wish, but also just really want to listen for feedback because my intention is to receive feedback and then, make decisions, because we want to, it's very important that we act, right? That I make a decision, explain why, and that we act, that we move forward. And so I want to allow for consultation and feedback, but don't want to delay too long as we make decisions. And as I do, as you can see from the report, I trust you've read it, there are sort of high level recommendations that Judge Cordell made, and sort of very, very specific ones. And in a sense, part of my listening is to help me prioritize, like, what do we do first? The big one is, looking at a more holistic approach to campus safety, which better balances which she found an overemphasis on law enforcement and more of an emphasis on student wellness, student concern, student safety in the real breadth of what that word means, student belonging. And one of the concrete suggestions is sort of organizationally moving campus safety under student life. As you are all students and our student leaders, it'd be helpful for me to hear from you, what are the pros and cons of that? Judge Cordell certainly knows about universities. She was at Stanford in 2 different capacities for over a decade, so she understands universities. Not very familiar with Santa Clara, so we want to make sure any decision is really reflective of Santa Clara and is best for us. But that's a big one. And she indicates reasons for making that move as a way that campus safety can better serve the community. So that's just one, that first recommendation on reimagining campus safety with a more holistic approach. There are lots of other specific recommendations which are more operational. Some of those have already begun, for instance, developing a more extensive and cohesive training program. So we're already developing that. There's some recommendations that you may have that are not in the report. So one that has emerged over the last week is, developing, in a sense, an advisory council, which is a way for campus safety to receive feedback. So one of the issues that emerged and that was identified is there needs to be a more consistent feedback mechanism for campus safety to do its job better and to better serve the community. So that advisory board would be one of them. So the audit of campus safety was the first of its kind in campus safety's history, and you saw some of the history there. So it was been long overdue, my intention, or what will happen, is that, like other parts of the university, so in student life, almost every part of student life, there's a review every few years, sort of a mega review every few years, often with an outside people coming in and examining and sharing best practices, getting student feedback regularly, getting feedback from others on campus. So that happens sort of regularly in academia, and it just hasn't happened in campus safety, and that's on us. So what I imagine is the audit is just sort of the first of what will be a regular practice of feedback on the meta level, sort of a bigger examination. And then, which I think is necessary, and which we've already begun to examine, is, well, what about ongoing feedback, right? And this is good practice for any university or any business, is how do we give regular feedback to those who want to serve better, right? So in a sense, we can ask, after every interaction with campus safety, is there a way to give feedback? There's another university that has one of those little codes that So a business card is given to a student after any interaction, positive, it doesn't matter what the interaction is, and there's a barcode that they can scan and they could give immediate feedback. Our information systems, our university information system staff does that with every interaction. They get immediate feedback about, so how do we do? Did we help or not? So I think that's one of the things that we're already working on. So some recommendations are sort of easy to act on. Some are going to take more time because we need more input, particularly from students because of the concerns that have been expressed. And we need to understand from you, well, what's the best way to address those concerns in the right way for Santa Clara? And I think just bigger picture, consider the audit as part of my ongoing commitment to greater transparency and accountability. So that's a very important priority for me. There's really two that I'm thinking about all the time: greater access and affordability to Santa Clara, and greater accountability and transparency. So with the audit is one example, but hopefully you had a chance to review the Ohlone History Working Group report, which was a year-long effort. And we had an event in December, which the working group talked about their work, and then we're going to begin to sort of work through those recommendations. You know that we launched a new dashboard, an Advancing Racial Justice dashboard, and the purpose of that dashboard is to track what we have now counted as over 500 initiatives, both large and small, which are advancing our goal of being an anti-racist university. Because we need to track our progress, and that has not been done well the last few years. So we have a task force, we have committees, there are recommendations, but we don't go back to you and say, how are we doing? And so that dashboard actually allows us to say progress, in progress, or no progress. And so that type of accountability is what I'm really, really committed to. So let me stop there. And I don't know how we manage this, Justin, but just hearing feedback or answering questions.
I can take it, Justin. Hi, Father Brian. Thanks for doing this.
Sierra. Sure.
So what we're going to be doing is I'm just going to call on some folks, and then they have already provided some questions, and then we'll see if other people send in some feedback or whatnot.
Great.
Okay, Abby, go for it.
Hi, Father O'Brien. Thank you for joining us. I'm up here. So my question is kind of about balancing what you were just talking about with the audit, which is recommendations for structural change, which I'm really glad was focused on. I think that's how the biggest changes will be made, but also kind of remembering and honoring that this audit and the supplemental investigation rose out of two really specific incidents, which were the incident with Dr. Morgan and then the Blue Lives Matter flag at the Diversity Forum. And I know that there's already a separate investigation happening for the incident with Dr. Morgan, but I guess I'm just wondering how you plan to kind of balance the individual accountability that's necessary as well. I guess my concern reading the audit is that even if we make these changes where we move campus safety under a different department or kind of dress them to look less like police, that if in their minds they didn't see like something wrong with what happened the first times, you know, some commented that the diversity trainings were a waste of time. John Loretto, who was most directly involved, he was the one with the flag, didn't comment in the audit. I guess I'm just wondering how we can make sure that the people who are, you know, within the organizations are being held accountable as well.
Right, and so I think that's my job. That's a job of whatever organizational structure they fit into. But I think you're absolutely right. And so what we want to be clear about is, and that's why there's a recommendation to look at position descriptions, which is basically, I have a position description, I'm accountable for that, right? And that's how I'm measured. That's how I keep my job or not. So I think it's for public safety to be very clear, okay, this is our ethos, this is our expectation, and we will hold you accountable to that. And so I think I would say that for anyone who works at the university, but to go to your question, that's the point. The training is a very important, and that's one of the recommendations, and the training can't be just a one-off, right? I mean, Jennifer Eberhard, who at Stanford for me is the best at this, she wrote the book Biased, and we relied on her for various trainings, including of the cabinet at Santa Clara, my cabinet. But the training has to be ongoing. She says, you know, it can't be once. Culture, minds, hearts, it takes some time. there has to be openness. If there's not openness to change, then there must be a parting of ways. But if there's an openness, a desire for change, a desire to learn, then I could just say that generally that we can work with that. But I think that the training has got to be ongoing. It just can't be a one-off. And the culture change, this is really what we're looking at, is a culture change. And that's got to come both from the top by example, but also ground level. So I think what needs to happen, frankly, is conversations between students and campus safety that are, for those who want to, that are productive and helpful, so that campus safety understands better, not just a mediated voice, what I could say, but what they can hear directly from students in this case. So, yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Individual accountability and sort of a cultural change have to happen at the same time. You mentioned the incident. So the audit, I announced the audit after the incident involving campus safety in the Morgan family in August. So I think a week later I announced the audit, and we committed it would be a 4-month audit. So just so you know, and there's been some confusion, when the incident occurred, under our what's called Title IX, which some of you might be familiar with, it's a process for alleging any kind of harassment on campus, sexual harassment, harassment based on race or another protected category, that under the law and under the rules adopted by Santa Clara applying federal law, and that was adopted by students and faculty and staff last summer, there's a process. And what I did is I say, well, let's get an independent investigator who will look at that. So there's no interference from me or anyone else. And once I did that, I don't have control over that investigator. They have freedom to do it. So what that investigator is doing, and Belinda Guthrie, who's the head of our Title IX office, she in a sense is in dialogue with the investigator who will complete a report. We'll give it to both parties. Both parties can comment on the report. And then what happens is a body of faculty and staff is convened to review the report and make any findings or any action that may be punishment of some kind. So that's the process that I'm not directly involved in, though certainly I'm interested in. But just so you know that's a different track. I definitely had control over the audit in saying this time. And in that sense, the audit is always incomplete because there's more we could have done. I would have loved to have gotten more student feedback. We didn't have time to do focus groups, but we can in the future do that. So I consider the audit a start. So thanks for your question. Sorry, it's a long answer, Abby.
Sam, do you mind asking your question next?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Father Brian.
Hey, Sam. Good to see you.
I noticed that although the audit does bring attention to the extent of campus safety's diversity in terms of demographics, it doesn't thoroughly describe any efforts to be more actively inclusive of the BIPOC community. So with that said, my question is, when and how will campus safety be held more accountable to embody values of diversity and inclusion so that the BIPOC community on campus feels safe and cared for?
Right. So I think that goes really the same question is to hold them accountable to our expectations. And so part of what I want to hear is how do we measure that from the students in the BIPOC community? And their voice is central here, both our faculty, staff, and students. How do we know that? How do we measure that? How do we provide ongoing feedback which says that campus safety, or frankly, any office, that I'm living up to that expectation? And one of my deep commitments as a president and as a Jesuit priest, frankly, is to make sure that our students have a sense of belonging here and safety here. So what we need to do is we can have metrics to that, right? We can assess complaints and we could put up structures. And one of the recommendations is to go through the policy manual, which is very important because that's like a contract. But it's also to listen to our students to say, so what does belonging look like? And part of the reason why I think that the suggestion to go student life is interesting is because it's really about relationship building, right? So what Judge Cordell said is What she wanted to move away from was enforcers to partners, like in a different way, but like, you know, some of your mentors within student life. You're adults, so you're living your own lives, you're your own persons, but we consider our mentorship and partnership with you important. I don't think many students consider campus safety presently as partners. I know that many in campus safety would like that, but I think we need to figure out what does that actually look like? And hearing from our different communities, including the BIPOC community, would be very important to do that. And that's why I need to hear ideas from you, suggestions about accountabilities. If we were revising position descriptions as we're looking at, what measure would you want in there to make sure that we can say, okay, you're living up to that or not, besides generally saying, you know, acting in a way that it respects diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what other concrete things can we ask of our public safety officers?
I think that's an important distinction, and I put in the chat for everyone. If you would like to offer some feedback, feel free to message me and I'll compile it into a document. But I know that a lot of students had questions as well, so I want to balance the questions and the feedback.
Yeah, please send them, Sierra. So we're looking for ideas.
Will do.
Okay.
Okay, another question I'd like to have ask is Angel's question.
Hi, Father O'Brien.
Hi, Angel.
Okay, so after reading the audit really comprehensively, there's a bunch of recommendations that Judge Cordell provides that I think a lot of them are really valuable. But in the event that any of the recommendations provided can't or will not be fulfilled, can you commit to providing a justification or reasoning behind those decisions?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and most of them are reasonable. And the other thing is there are, and actually, I just need to figure, like, can I give you one example? Uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great idea. Apparently they did a uniform change 10 years ago. I think it's a great idea. I don't know what that actually will look like in the end, but I think that's that's an important symbol. But it may just take some time to figure that one out. But yeah, I think absolutely, that's what I owe you. Can I also say there could be a hybrid? So like this came up recently, I was talking about feedback loops. One thing she did not have in there, which I think is a good idea because it's used at other universities, is advisory boards, an advisory board. Like a lot of our organizations have advisory boards, but an advisory board of faculty, staff, and students, which is standing, which that is, it's ongoing, that meeting regularly, giving direct feedback to the campus safety leadership. And that's just another feedback. We need more feedback mechanisms, I think, ongoing, so that we're improving, we're challenging, we're holding accountable continually, just not once a year with an audit. But yes, I will. And can I say on this idea of student life, there's other universities have, so in terms of structure, some report to operations, which is what happens at Santa Clara. Some report to the university council. Some report to student affairs. There are 4 Jesuit universities that report that campus safety is part of student life. Another is reports to public affairs, sort of the external facing. But there might be another way for us to think about this. Is it a hybrid of those? Is it a hybrid approach that we are not thinking about? So I'm asking to be creative, and we're researching other universities. We have been doing that now for a while. So yes, Angel, you have my promise.
Yeah, thank you.
And an anonymous question to that is just like, how often do you anticipate these feedback surveys in terms of like, the recommendation included periodic mental health, anti-bias, implicit bias trainings, and campus-wide surveys. How would you define periodic? Do you think it would be every year, quarterly?
So I don't know exactly, but I can say training would be ongoing, right? So that would be like a monthly thing, right? That's sort of been a standard, I understand, a standard practice in campus safety across the country. So definitely a monthly, like a lot of offices on campus have ongoing training, professional development, we call it. In terms of the feedback, I think there are various levels there. I think when there's an interaction, there's feedback. With an advisory board, there's feedback. ASG did a student survey 5 years ago. You know, maybe they do it every year. And maybe surveys not the way to go. Maybe there's another way to do it. So I love your ideas. Send your ideas along. What's vital for us to be a better university, not just in public safety, but elsewhere, is we need more immediate feedback, and then we need to receive the feedback, and then tell you how we acted or not and why.
Emma, I think your question would be helpful next, especially because it combines feedback with a question.
All right, so hi, Father O'Brien. My name is Emma. I think we've met before, but I'm on SCU EMS and their leadership team, as well as ASG. And as I'm sure you and everyone else knows, that we work very closely with campus safety. And in the audit, it was mentioned briefly that we partner with them to help serve the campus community in a medical assessment type of way. And I'm first wondering if there were any EMS calls that were assessed in the audit, as there are many incidents that we see from a firsthand point of view. And then in addition to that, many people are apprehensive now to call us since we are connected so closely with campus safety. As an EMT on campus, I've been asked a lot what the role of campus safety will be moving forward. And some want us disconnected completely from them so that when we arrive, they're not arriving. And so as we ask to suspend room searches and are thinking about altering their relationship with residence life, I'm wondering how that would also affect our relationship with them in the realm of SCU EMS, and what you envision happening in order to ensure that we can provide students a safe environment to assess them medically without having to worry about their fears.
Yep. Yeah, no, Emma, thank you. It's a great question. I don't have the exact answer. So this is your this feedback is really helpful. There was, okay, I don't know whether she, among the feedback that she got, I can't recall now whether any of it was related to, the online feedback where you could write comments. Perhaps there was, I just don't know, descriptions of an EMS call, but clearly she named this, the idea of sort of room searches as being an issue that came up among students. I know there's something Jeannie Rosenberger and others are sort of working through. So I think it's a really important question, because in the end we want, EMS, just I'm a big fan of EMS. I know the good work you do. I've seen it in action. I know what you do and the amount of time you put into it. So thank you. But I think we need to hear more from EMS about how that's going to work, because we have to make sure that students get the help. And if they're not getting the help, we got to think of another way. So I don't have the answer for you, except to say we need. So I think, Emma, we'll make sure we follow up with EMS on this sort of engagement with residents' life, because often the engagements are in residence halls, but not always. So we'll follow up, Emma.
Thank you.
Father O'Brien, I do recognize it's 8:19. Do you have some time to?
No, I have all the time in the world for you all. So
amazing.
This is the best part of the day, hanging out with students. I go to boring meetings all day, so I'd rather hang out with students. So I'm happy to stay for I know you guys have been on a while, so yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I know we all really appreciate that. Okay, Cassidy, you want to ask your question? I think it's helpful.
Hello, Father Brian. I think mine's also related to type of personnel and relationships going forward past the audit. From the audit, it does seem that your relationship with CSS is strained as individuals called into question your leadership ability. How will you go about dealing with your relationship with CSS so that change is effective, efficient, and will actually get done?
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. I think what I made clear to Judge Cordell is like you put it all in there, even complaints against me. So and I will let those complaints speak for themselves. I'm always willing to learn from people's reactions, including students. I receive your feedback and I welcome it because I want to be better. All I know is I'm committed to making this work. I'm committed to working with campus safety. They're members of the community. We need our students to feel safe. I'm committed to change to make that happen. And safety is in a variety of words: physical safety, mental safety, but a safety in a sense of that our students feel a sense of belonging, that this is their home. And I'm deeply committed to that. So I think for me, that's the end, right? And I know I want to work with people who want to get there to that end. And so I'm willing to work through any relationship, strained or otherwise, to get there. One of my practices is always to be open to talk, to meet, and I'll meet with campus safety. I've said that I'll meet with them soon to sort of hear their feedback about the report, get their ideas. But in the end, as leader of the university, I have to make decisions. I got to make expectations clear, and we're just going to move forward. And I really, I want campus safety to come with us. They're committed to serve. They want to serve, and I want to bring them along with us to do that. But it's a good question. It's actually also a very, very human question, right? How do you work through? For me, it's all about focusing on a common end we have. And I don't take any criticism personally. I determine which criticism is constructive and helpful and which is not, which might distract me or us from the end we want to seek, which is to better serve our students.
Thank you for that. I think so. In terms of some anonymous questions that are a bit shorter, what is the justification behind not reporting on CSS activities and budget in terms of like some sort of annual report? And if there is no justification, maybe that's some feedback that we could start implementing.
I'm not sure I completely understand. So we reported in the audit, there's a budget, right?
In terms of like an annual report, kind of like what the audit was, but like CSS would offer.
No, so it's like the annual report of sort of a very condensed form of the audit, like these contexts, these incidences, sort of data. It makes sense to me. I mean, we just reported them for 10 years. So I think it makes better sense to do that a little bit more regularly. That's one of the recommendations. It all goes to transparency, right?
Right.
There's some confidential information about people involved, but besides that, I think incidences, budget, stuff like that. Sure.
Great. Another question, anonymous, was how does Father O'Brien, how do you envision a holistic approach to redesign CSS without fully removing it? Will the university plan on limiting campus safety's presence on campus by funding resources that are proactive rather than reactive, since campus safety is reactive?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly the point. Is right. So we want to be proactive, not reactive. We want to going back to what I said at the beginning about not beginning from law enforcement or enforcer, but partner. That campus safety officers, that they are invested. We want to make sure we have an environment which are invested in student success and student learning, that they're real partners in that. I think I just say yes to that. And I think, can I just say that once let's say, like the decisions are going to be ongoing. Like we're going to, in other words, I'll tell you what I've decided, but like if I decide about where campus safety reports based on your feedback, like that's just the beginning. Then there's got to be like, well, then how do you actually integrate campus safety into this new unit? I mean, that's going to take time because you have staff members involved. You got to think about like culturally, how do you move that work along? So, and I think Sierra, in the feedback that people send you, I really want to hear about, does this make sense to put it under student life? And so please send Sierra that feedback. There are reasons for it. I mean, there are downsides too, I imagine, to that as well. Some people would say, well, actually some distance from student life would be helpful. There are advantages to that. Maybe there's a way of doing a hybrid. I'm in the listening mode on that one, Sarah. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to speak for everyone or most people here, I think there's this conversation about you can change the the outfits or the uniforms, and you can change the symbols on the PowerPoints, but ultimately these are the same people no matter what they're wearing and what they're presenting. And so in order to give campus safety a facelift in a way, we really need to look at who are the people in the uniforms, and are they, if they're clearly not changing and how they reacted to a lot of the audit questions, then does that mean that we genuinely have a complete new staff coming in? And so I'm curious if you have any comments on that, since that was a general theme in our conversations.
I can understand that. I think, and I just agree with the main point there is that we need a campus safety which is on board to a vision, this holistic vision that she reports, is committed to transparency and accountability and student wellness. And so that's what we need. Can I just end, is there a last question? I just one final point I want to make before.
Yeah, I think Hawad wanted to ask a question, and then just generally there's one more question that kind of ties it all up as well, if we can ask that. And I think we basically made it through majority of the things.
Okay, good.
Hawad, go for it.
What?
Hey, Father O'Brien, thank you for being here. I just wanted you to know that the audit is really popular amongst members of the university community that I've spoken with. I think it has really sparked hope for change. Personally, I was mentioning this before you came on, I've interacted with CSS in several different ways. I worked for some time in the transportation office. I was a CF in Res Life. And in my spare time last year as a student canvasser, I had some confrontations with CSS when I was canvassing students to register them to vote without prior approval. So I like to think that I've seen them from a few different angles. And we've talked so far about the need for recruitment, promotion, and retention that centers around diversity. But I just wanted to express a certain viewpoint that I've heard from fellow students, which is that the reimagined department cannot include ex-law enforcement, sort of on principle, not only in future-facing recruitment, but also in our current rank and file personnel, in the sense that if we are reimagining the department to move away from policing and towards community care, that it's just not compatible with having and recruiting ex-law enforcement. So I just wanted to know what you think of that and whether you think that that's something that we can achieve in the near future.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback. I think it's a great question for us to explore. So I have to really think through that. It's a really big question, and it goes to the reimagining part, which we're in the process of doing, but I appreciate that feedback a lot.
And the last question is kind of like, we have the audit, now what? What is the timeline looking like? How are you delegating this and to others, and where do students come in terms of helping, but also recognizing that the onus can't be on us all the time to do the work for particularly the BIPOC community.
Yeah, I know I get that. I want feedback to the extent that we want to give it, and there's continue to offer it. I want to be transparent. It's all out there. The reports there. Timing, again, some recommendations we're already doing. The bigger ones about organization and the reimagining. I think that I want to make a decision this quarter about the organization, because that I think that's sort of that's a big one, that reimagining piece. But the centerpiece of that is, where does campus safety report? That to me is a decision to be made shortly. And then some of the other recommendations will need more student feedback in, like feedback loops. Is there an advisory board? How do we compose it? Some are recommendations we're already enacting. My last point, I just stepping back, and first of all, it's great to be with you, and I appreciate everything you do for Santa Clara at a time where Santa Clara, we're at a unique moment in our history, and so I'd acknowledge what this last year has been like for you. So thank you, and I express my care and love for you. Big picture, what I want to move towards is where the way of proceeding at Santa Clara is defined by restorative justice. And that's a principle both in the Catholic tradition and the secular tradition, which looks at ways of relating on a deeper level, where we consider how we relate to one another in a restorative way. So like, for instance, when there's harm, when there's disagreement, when there's a rupture of relationship, we try to repair that relationship in a way that there is both truth-telling and justice-making. And where we aim not just for retribution, there must be accountability, of course, but also restoration or reconciliation of all parts of the community that have been ruptured, right? And so it's a holistic way of looking at our community rather than just as transactional or an incident involving just two people. Usually that involves a whole community. And it demands a different way of speaking, of acting, of listening, of relating. And you're gonna hear more about that from me and from Provost Kloppenberg and Margaret Russell, because I've learned, and this is not just from the audit, but something I've been talking about for a year now, that if we want to actually transform culture, restorative justice might be the way to go for us, because it's true to who we are. We actually have a restorative justice program within student conduct, but it's so much more than that. It could deal with roommate stuff. It could deal with campus safety. It could deal with harmful impacts of different kinds or disagreements. But I think it's a way for us. And so I hope to engage ASG in those conversations about restorative justice. So thank you so much. And please direct more feedback to Sierra.
Thanks, Father O'Brien. Will we be expecting any email, like as a follow-up to the audit from you in terms of some sort of roadmap or timeline on kind of what's next, so students broadly know, since not everyone could come tonight, of course?
Yeah, there'll eventually be an email about acting on the recommendations. Yes. Well, I'm now in listening mode, so I just need time to listen and to reflect and to make sure any decision I make is informed.
Definitely. Well, we'll be sending over feedback as well as getting some feedback from the broader student community via social media.
Great, excellent. Good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Father.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
That we can kind of shift towards this next part, or the ending. We can shift towards roundtable remarks. How do you guys think that went? And again, we can adjourn early if we want, and we can stop the recording if you guys want to have more honest. If you guys don't want to be limited in what you're able to say. But personally, I think it helped a little bit. But again, I understand that Father O'Brien was definitely, like, as he's called it, like in listening mode, and I think it's valuable for him. It's good that he's taking in a lot of feedback from like all stakeholders of the university. But at this point, I feel like a lot of us, like, we've waited for almost, it's going to be 2 quarters if this is done at the end of the quarter, and it's like I'm just worried that like things aren't going to happen, and they're not going to happen soon enough. And I did wish that he would have been able to give a little bit more of a concrete like roadmap of, oh, okay, we'll have things done by week 5 or have things done by week 8. He wasn't able to provide that, but I guess that's going to be on us to continue to follow up with him to make sure that such a roadmap is presented to the general student body. But with that, if you have any like thing you want to share, and please, there's a lot of people that are still here that aren't in Senate. If you have any comments or questions or concerns, feel free to voice them now. And we can start with Anne.
Justin, would you like me to screen share the current feedback that I have, and then we can build off of that? Would that be helpful? I can't hear you. Something's wrong.
We still can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say you put your thumbs up, so.
He said that would.
Got it.
I think it's still important that we have a place where some kind of forum next week where there can be a discussion about more about what students want too, especially because he is in listening mode and really wants to see more of student concerns. And I also think it's important we put on like our ASG Instagram, all of that jazz, just to get as much feedback as possible while we're here. I think it's a good, and it's frustrating to not know, like, okay, what's a timeline? What's happening here? What do you want? What are you going to prioritize? And like, just have all of those things down. But it's a sign that really different perspectives are being considered. And I think that's something that we need to reach out to people beyond ASG. Yeah, that's a good idea. Google form. And just have different avenues for input while we're in this phase. So then moving forward, we can actually say, all right, this is what all this looks like. These are continuing themes. These are things students really, truly want. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a little bit of reaction to that, and I know that that he did say that he's in listening mode, and that there's a lot of like student feedback that's necessary. But I do worry that it seems like a lot of the responsibility for change is being placed on students, and particularly BIPOC students. I think that an advisory council, like, I think all these are great ideas, but I think it continuously pushes the responsibility to hold campus safety accountable onto students and people of color. And so I think that that's something that alerted me for sure, and that I'm a little worried about, and that we should definitely keep an eye on going forward, especially with talking with students and things like that. Because while like we want to do what we can to make the campus safe, it is also the responsibility of administration to take the responsibility to keep us safe as well.
Before I talk, I would like to comment. I have an incense behind me. It's not smoke. Well, it's smoke from an incense. But anyway, to respond to what Cassidy said, to be like so transparent, that was very emotionally taxing for me. I feel like throughout this whole process, I've just been so upset because the way that campus has handled this, especially because when all of these incidents first happened, there was so much feedback. There was so much that students had to say. And now they're like, okay, well, what were you saying? Like, that's frustrating. At least the nicest word I could use is frustrating. And I'm not saying that this is all on Father O'Brien, and I completely appreciate his time here, and I love that he's in listening mode. That's great. But what about when we were sharing? And so, yeah, thank you, Cassidy, for addressing that. But I did want to talk about one of the suggestions that I made, kind of based on what he was talking about like a QR code on a card or something. I think that it would, if that were implemented, the way that to me it would feel even effective is if there was a limit as to how much negative feedback that officers could get before they are terminated. Because honestly, like, that's the most effective thing. Like, if you are going to continue having negative experiences with students, and students are able to actively review you, even though it's, again, our responsibility to do that, we need like feasible things that are going to happen to them if they continue to get negative feedback. And then I also was thinking that I think it should be campus safety officers' responsibility to interact with students. And I think that they should do that in a way outside of them policing us. I think that it should be their responsibility as a campus safety officer to have casual experiences with us. And I kind of think that at this point, that's not something that they're willing to do. So I feel that a quota should be implemented about how many experiences they could have in that sense. I don't know what that would look like, but I don't think it's my responsibility to know what that would look like. But that's just how I feel about it.
Juan?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I think following up on what Zakia said, personally, I think the position that ASG needs to adopt at this time in order to help expedite and accelerate this process is actually, and this sounds counterintuitive, I think is to discourage further listening, further feedback, further dialogue and discourse amongst the student body or between the student body and CSS as facilitated by administration, until we see a timeline and roadmap for, at the bare minimum, the implementation of the majority, if not the entirety, of what the audit calls for. I think we've really reached an impasse, and Zakia voices this well, in the sense that there is really no capacity for advocacy or meaningful activism during a time in which these two major incidents have occurred, and as Justin has mentioned in the past, have been delayed and actually have been pacified by patience for the audit, patience for the investigation. I think if the university and the administration aren't moving to implement these things as soon as possible, then we really don't have a function in the meantime. So I'm against advisory councils, I'm against working groups, I'm against task forces, and frankly, I'm against individual projects to try and push specific pieces of the audit. It should really be implemented in its entirety as soon as possible.
I do
And if I
think,
were to add on,
sorry, I think a big frustration, something I feel it's like, well, if there's the feedback that you wanted, we have the audit, we have all these recommendations. What's the point in talking to students and saying, which recommendations do you think we need? Like this, all of these recommendations should be adopted and more. So that's where when I see like the need for more conversations, or if people want to have conversations, people are tired of this, and here are the things to do. So go put these in action, and then take the additional feedback we have from students and then pass that on and say, while you're listening, here are some other things too. If we're going to have feedback sessions, I think that is where this lies. I don't think it should be, oh, like, which point do you want the most? Take all of them. They're all issues. And then what else can we do? And I think that is a good thing that can come out of more conversations if people want to have those conversations.
Paula?
Yeah, thank you. To go off of that, I think, for so long we've been in feedback mode, and the whole student body has been in feedback mode, and it's been really bottom up, and for so long that feedback has been, we need like top down, like that's what we need. I'm like very frustrated right now. I'm like physically frustrated. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to say really quickly.
I think like on the one hand, like there are probably like hundreds of changes that that the administration can and will implement now that are like beyond obvious for us, and it's a waste of our time really to be pushing on those obvious changes, because like if we're going to bring it up, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do it anyways, right? That being said, though, I still do see some value in quote unquote listening sessions, and the reason I say that is because I'm worried that, if we move beyond this point of listening and it's action from the administration, after they act, will they still listen? And perhaps the greater concern, and I think what we should be focusing on instead is, okay, like, we're done listening. I mean, we're done talking. We just want you guys to do work. We want you guys to implement like concrete like actions, and then from there make it clear that like we still want to be involved in the process. And like after you give us an entire list of, here are all the things that we will do and we will implement with like a roadmap of, okay, here's how many years, how many months this will be done. After if we can take a look at that and from there on critique, it's going to be a lot more productive than what we're doing right now, because again, it's like there's hundreds of different things that we could do to kind of do that. But that's also not to say though, like once Father O'Brien and once the administration, like, has a concrete set of plans, right? And if that concrete set of plans involve, moving campus safety underneath student life, and after they do that, we realize, wait, we don't want them to do that. Or afterwards you realize, wait, we don't want campus safety to exist on campus at all. If that feedback comes after they've invested like hours and hours and hours, and honestly like hundreds of thousands of dollars in this reshuffling, it's going to be a lot harder for them to implement those changes after the fact, which is why like if there are any like kind of big things that we're like, oh my goodness, great, like you can implement all these recommendations, but we still need X, Y, and Z. If those X, Y, and Z involve like are complete like 0 to 100, like 180 shift from like what the recommendations are, I think those need to be vocalized now. Those need to be like communicated now, because later down the line, I think it's going to be too late. And I feel like this is a really good segue towards like, what do we want this week 3 event to look like? Do we want this week 3 event to look like us as ASG, we are going to put forth, here's what we want to see? Or is it beyond that? Is it kind of just going to be more of a, like, I don't really know what this event like week 3 would look like actually.
Just going off quickly of what like Justin said, like just something really quickly that came up in my mind when Justin was talking is like a lot of questions that we posed, he didn't really have full answers for, and he had like not even thought about, like Hawad's question and like my question. There were a few others as well. Like he seemed like he hadn't looked at that perspective yet because there's just so much going on. I'm sure that he hasn't had the opportunity to attend to everything. And I guess like what I'm saying is like, yeah, we don't want to keep having to tell them what we want, but at the same time, like once they figure everything out, they're never going to figure everything out, but once they figure out the things that they're going to do, it would be really disappointing if we had not said what we needed to say and they hadn't like at least heard it. Because like today he like made a direct promise to Angel, you know what I mean? And like I'm not saying that we need, actually I am saying that it would be great to have 1 million direct promises. Actually, that is what I'm saying. But I think that there is a lot of power in bringing up things that maybe they haven't thought about. Like the fact that he just couldn't answer some of our questions means that they haven't considered them to the point where he has an answer. And I think that bringing them up at least shows that like it was brought up, so that if we were to complain later and be like, why weren't these things done, they couldn't claim that they didn't know about it. So that's just my 2 cents.
So kind of, okay, I'm not backtracking on what I said about being upset that
Never mind.
what? Sorry.
Go for it. Sorry.
I'm not backtracking on what I said about being, upset about continually being asked, but I do think that Justin, you made some really, really good points. And I think that thinking about the event that we would have, for one, I think it's important to validate the feelings of students, because like Paula said, like a lot of people have said so far, it's hard, it's difficult, it's frustrating, especially for BIPOC students, because at this point it's just like, but that's not the point. But I think that we should validate those feelings for students, because that's something that they need to get off their chest. But I do also really think that if they are finally listening, we need to take advantage of that. Like, if I've been waiting this long for it, I'm not going to be mad that they're finally doing it now. So I feel like in some way we should have, like what CR is doing now, like a way to compile all of what they're saying, and then a way to present that to Father O'Brien, to admin, whoever, in a way that's not overwhelming, so that they can kind of take a cumulative look at it and be able to apply it in a real way.
Hawad, your hand was up. I don't know if it was from an earlier response or an earlier question.
No, it was up for a new point, I guess, as specifically speaking to the idea of sort of week 3, or rather after today, ASG involvement or event or campaign. And I say campaign just because I fear that some kind of event would end up being a sort of another discussion or breakdown, which again, I should say I'm not opposed to. I think there is a really crucial role we have to play in making sure that students are seeing what the audit says, remembering this entire timeline of events. We don't want the really awful events from the summer and the fall to go forgotten, although I don't think that's happening. But I think one thing that ASG could do more and doesn't do as much at this time, which we could consider on this issue, is show and build a consensus amongst the campus community. So I think there is an opportunity for us to actually draft or compose, whether it's a resolution or some other kind of petition, our support for the recommendations of the audit. And if we do have, like what you said, Justin, specific grievances, specific addendums or additional changes we want to see, ultimately, I think what we could do as ASG is really go out there, all of us, every single one of us, try and gather support from our peers for these actions to be implemented, again, with any changes that we want included from our own conversations with one another in the student body, and really push for that to take place as soon as possible and build agency for ourselves. I've heard so many folks tonight mention that they feel like they're just waiting. And now that the audit report is out, and now that we've heard Father O'Brien's kind of current position, that we really need to take matters into our own hands and say that what we want as a student body now is really quick action on provided recommendations and additional items as well. As Anne mentioned, it's not going to end here in any capacity. So for example, something like 5,000 signatures, I think would be absolutely really impressive if that's something that we were able to accomplish in the course of the next few weeks in winter quarter, something that has never been done before, I don't think.
From faculty, staff, and students, alumni, or just students?
Whoever is supportive, yeah.
I actually think that'd be a really good idea. And if that's something that we would want to do, I know you mentioned there'd be addendum, or in like what Sarah says, addendums can include any grievances. And I think the grievances would include Hawad, like the point that you made about not hiring any ex-law enforcement personnel. And I'm sure like everyone here still has some personal grievances about like, you know, like maybe it shouldn't be campus safety that goes around with EMTs like during their rounds. I don't know if that's something that you think, Emma, but like so something like that, like those grievances, those that we need to do more research, and we need to do more like we need to ask the student body, like specifically like okay, like I think it's kind of assumed that like everything in like this resolution that or this petition or whatever thing that we would put forth would include us supporting most if not all of the recommendations that came forth from the audit, but kind of the plus ones, like what are those plus ones? And if we are to kind of aggregate all of that together, the resolution, I mean the audit itself, including these grievances, and to get 5,000 signatures on that, I think it'd be very difficult for the administration to not listen to that. Whereas if it's just one person speaking up on a specific point during a forum, it's a lot easier for them to ignore that. That being said, that's going to be a lot of work, but I think it's work that I'm personally willing to put in. And I think, Ciara, like in terms of this week 3, in this week 3 event, do you feel like you have a better understanding of what needs to be done? Or do you think we should hash that out a little bit more?
Yeah, first and foremost, I just appreciate all of you. I know it's getting to be way past Senate time. But I think in terms of next week, how we need to approach this is kind of do some sort of, organizing in terms of highlighting what we really want to see come out of, like, what are those grievances, as Hawad pointed out, and then maybe formatting like if we want to do a petition. I just want to once again make sure that we are conveying to admin that we appreciate that they're listening, as Justin said, because the last thing I want to happen is the university does things on their own and those things do not align, and they were just tone deaf, and then we ostracized and alienated them because we're like, well, now it's time for you to do your job. We don't want to give feedback, kind of thing. So I think there's a very fine line and type of thing we need to dance around in a way. But besides that, in terms of next week, I think it'd be good to see a lot of senators and just ASG members in general at an event like that, while also encouraging other students to show up. But I think the general vibe I got from tonight was that Father Brian I don't think he was expecting to answer so many questions, and he just wanted to hear feedback, which I totally understand. So I think if you can continue to provide me feedback within the next, day by tomorrow, so that I can send him over everything, because I also don't want to convey that we don't have any feedback to give, and that the status quo of the audit is good as is. So I'll send over the feedback to him tomorrow and say this is what we have so far. However, we'll be gathering more next week, but this is something he should go off of for in the meantime. I don't know, Justin, did that answer your question adequately?
And I think with Hawad's like suggestion, like it would be in the form of a resolution, but it would really just be a proposal. But this would be, you know, a reimagining of the campus safety as said, like by the student body, and what we would like to propose. Obviously, we would borrow a lot from the audit and use a lot of the recommendations from the audit. And I think this event next week should be focused on kind of putting forth, okay, like here's what we know, here's all the recommendations that like come from the audit. That's already a given. We're not going to talk about that unless someone disagrees with one of those recommendations. But then also putting forth additional recommendations. Are there, you know, 10, 20, 50 additional things that we would want to add as an addendum? And if and then from week 3 we can do research on our own end, you know, whether or not these addendums are something that like the student body supports and would sign a petition over. And if there's widespread support for those addendums, they should be added. And then I would imagine a week 4, week 5 date for us to week 4, week 5 probably week 5 deadline for us to not only present that resolution, but also to get as many signatures for that resolution as possible. Does that sound like a good plan? Any suggestions, concerns?
Oh, can I add something? One last thing.
Go for it.
I also know that like a lot of you were in the camp of like, we don't need CSS at all and abolish them. And especially when Dr. Ball came in last quarter to kind of reaffirm the fact that we don't need them. I understand that maybe Judge Cordell's recommendations or kind of what we've heard tonight is maybe discouraging or frustrating to you all. But I personally think that like because in her audit she didn't directly say anything along those lines, that would just kind of, although it's not off the table, I think it would just be something that is a battle that we will most likely lose. So I really want to make sure that we're approaching the things that really make sense and are urgent in terms of how we can improve CSS substantially in the near future, like in the next 6 months upon graduation, or upon my graduation, the senior graduation, but upon June.
Also, as we kind of do more research on again like what those grievances are, if there is kind of a sense of, okay, like we're gonna say this, but we know like we're 90% sure that they're not going to implement it. I don't think just because that's the case, it's not worth us putting forth a resolution for that. I think if anything, we can have like an additional, like a second resolution, like a main resolution in terms of like a proposal that we can get like 5,000 signatures for, and then kind of a separate resolution, kind of like if there are people who do not think campus safety should exist at all, and they can come up with a valid proposal that would work. And again, like they, at the end of the day, they are in listening mode, and we were to kind of compile that into like another, okay, here's like what David Ball would suggest, right? And a proposal that he would be in support of. And this is like a complete new perspective, something that we haven't really considered or we haven't really looked into. You know, if we were to also put out like vote on a resolution like that, and if that resolution were to also pass, I don't necessarily think that would take away from like a proposal that we would put. I think if anything, it would strengthen it. Although that being said, if the two of them obviously contradict one another, then we would have to kind of we would have to work that out. But I don't think it's not worth like pursuing, just to put that out there. And with that, it is now 9 p.m. I know you guys all have a lot of work. This is our longest Senate. Wow, oh my goodness. This is what Senate used to look like my freshman year. But yeah, I think if there aren't any other comments, questions, or concerns, I would entertain I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion from Angel.
Second.
Second.
KJ, all in favor say aye.
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 Around for a couple of minutes if y'all want to chat.